channel and you subscribe to the content that we're putting out, please make it official. Hit that sub button, leave a like, and obliterate the notification bell. And just in case you haven't seen this week's episode, be forewarned, there will be major spoilers from here on out. So as we begin this episode, we found out that the rest of our team was already caught up with our duo. We later learned this because May mentions that Mac and Deke were separated from the team for about 20 months or so. So I was initially thinking maybe it would take the entire episode to figure out how they would reunite, but this is bypassed more than likely to get to the fun of this chapter. There's got to be only ever a few other times where they've done this in an episode, where the events unfold in retrospect, but it is a meta moment to be sure, seeing as how all the episodes are retro themselves. Now, due to the events of the last entry, the Chromicon predictor Sibyl has had to make some slight adjustments, if you will. The explosion, which Phil sacrificed his body in, reduced their ship and their numbers to rubble. But the consciousness of Sibyl was never really in danger because she always implemented her plans from a virtual space. And from that virtual space, she has somehow managed to make contact with a computer programmer working as a repairman. And he is one who seems like he has nothing else better to do than to make a body for his would-be dream girlfriend. There's mention of power surges scattered throughout the episode, which we discover were Sibyl's attempts to communicate. Also, there's a ton of 80 references, which was going to end up in a different segment, but I'm just going to mention them as I go along. For example, the bodies which Sibyl inhabits look a lot like the Johnny 5 models from the movie Short Circuit. And the red lights moving back and forth with the LED is an obvious reference to Kit from Knight Rider. I used to love that show. Now the origin for the sound effects kind of bugged me for a couple hours, then it came to me. It is actually the same sound effect used for the Scions in Battlestar Galactica. Man, as you can see, all of these are 80s quintessential classics that helped shape the decade as we know it. Moving along, the robot which Russell the repairman uses to bring his candy is similar to the one in Back to the Future in concept, or it could be a nice reference to one of Tony Stark's helper robots. And the whole bring your girl to life through computer wizardry concept is of course an obvious homage to Weird Science. So when I initially mentioned Thor being referenced in my Season 7 announcement video, I didn't quite anticipate this parallel. From the very moment that Mac realized he was stranded in time, his demeanor and attitude never really wavered. Now, although he did settle up with Deke for not following orders and taking Wilfred Malek's life, Mac was resolute in wanting to do anything else with the mission, or anyone else for that matter. The loss of Mac's parents understandably had consumed him, and even though we see him trying to cope with it through the model cars, it still seemed as if Mac's grief was a long way from being over. Now, it's not exactly mentioned whether or not the model cars were a hobby that Mac and his dad used to bond over, or how he was able to keep the lights on for the better part of 2 years. But what we do know is that Deke stays in contact with him, trying to offer what he can and never giving up on him. Now, after many failed attempts to spend time with Mac or break through the haze of depression, Mac finally takes Deke up on an invite to a gig, even though the note was disguised as an urgent message. Okay, so when Mac shows up to Deke's location, we are treated to quite a few more 80s homages, the obvious one being Swayze's bar, which eerily resembles Patrick Swayze's bar in Roadhouse. And even though we're in the 2020s, there's still a following to keep these past staples alive in our present.
Help! Somebody!
Not while my scrotum is pressed up against my stomach in these jeans, they won't. Roadhouse.
So not too long after Mac arrives, and after a little asking around, both he and us, the audience, are treated to another 80s classic in the form of a song from the quintessential coming-of-age movie, The Breakfast Club. Now, once Mac gets a chance to talk face-to-face with Deke just after his plagiarized performance, Deke tells the depressed director that the band is a cover for his newly formed S.H.I.E.L.D team, which is cleverly introduced in the same manner in which the A-Team was introduced in their TV show. Again, you could tell that the writers of the show really wanted to have fun in their last season. Now, once Mac learns that Deke and his team has been picking up on some Chronicom chatter, Mac finally returns to the lighthouse and sees more than what he's bargained for. But among all that he sees as wrong, he finally does see Coulson, whose consciousness was also preserved in a max headroom type setup. The digitized Coulson does confirm that Sibyl, the predictor, is still out there, and that the aforementioned power surges experienced by those in the local power grid are in fact Sibyl's attempt at sending out messages, but most importantly, that despite her being the one primarily in charge of the time stream knowledge, she is also in the process of building new hunters. Now, as we are learning this information, we see Sibyl finally take care of Russell the repairman before sending her forces to infiltrate the lighthouse once again. As I was watching this episode, it was during these segments that I noticed just how it had become a bit excessively bloody. But as soon as it dawned on me that this is set in the 80s, which is the birthplace of just about every repeated and every rewatched slasher movie, it kind of made sense. As well as the sex equals death trope, which I don't even know why that's a thing. Now, a few more points before we end this segment. We get the whole team fails at first and then triumphs the end trope, mostly made popular by 80 shows. Just look it up. A nice Rambo homage. And out of the blue Doctor Who Dalek
Exterminate! Exterminate!
homage, as well as an even more subtle Terminator reference thrown in for good measure. Oh, and one last thing. We see Matt get his axe gun back, which was first introduced in the 3rd season as well as being featured throughout the show. We also get this from Deke after the first wave of Johnny Coms were defeated. Yes, I said Johnny Coms, leading him to say this.
I know, Ronnie. I know.
Which could be a subtle homage to this.
I love you.
I know.
I know.
Anyway, towards the end, Mac and Deke go pay a visit to his younger self. We are told, however, by Roxy Glass that this has always been the case or a regular thing, and that he has been checking up on younger Mac since he arrived in the 80s. Hell, it was the one thing that made Mac realize that he was not alone after all. And even though he may have lost his parents, both he and Deke can still fill in as a mentor, at least for the time being. So in the beginning of this episode, Deke was in the middle of a debriefing with May, and now we've been all caught up with present time. We see Deke squad holding down the fort, and we get to see Mac have a nice reunion with Yo-Yo. Yet, as we've been watching this episode, the reprogrammed helper bot, formerly owned by Russell the repairman, has been incognito the whole time. First it recovers the time stream data during the lighthouse invasion, then it makes its long journey, which abruptly ends at the feet of Daniel, who we thought might have met his end just when Daisy and Susan were escaping after Daniel attempted to claim her powers. But we see that not only is he alive and well, but now has possession of the time stream knowledge. This was an otherwise ominous ending to a mostly lighthearted episode. Now I'm even more excited to see how much of a threat both he and Sibyl pose to our team in future episodes. Well, that does it for this week's breakdown of the more important details of the show. And make sure you stay tuned in the Content Minute for those important details of next week's episode. And if you made it this far, we certainly appreciate you watching. And until then, see you then.